Well, again here, and we're going to be looking today at Hitchcock's Auteur signature. Start off here, I'd highly recommend you go off and watch some Hitchcock films other than Vertigo, which we'll be watching in class. The real stars, I'd say, of his oeuvre would be North by Northwest, Rear Window, and Psycho. Though if I was going to watch any Hitchcock films, those are the ones I'd recommend other than Vertigo. Also, the Hitchcock Truffaut movie, worth getting hold of as well. It's a documentary. Reading the book would be good as well. It's like a Bible of film studies. Anyway, so when it comes to the actual exam, you're going to be expected to be able to compare Vertigo with Apocalypse Now. But the kind of questions you might get, or I'm going to be giving you anyway, when we're talking about Vertigo, would be something like, to what extent can Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo be considered the work of an auteur, or is it simply a typical product of the classical Hollywood studio system? How useful is an auteur critical approach in studying Vertigo and Apocalypse Now might be a question. Something like that, okay? As you can see, they're asking questions about film theory with auteurism and the industrial context that influenced the making of these movies. And don't forget, you're going to be expected to be able to talk about very detailed and specific examples of micro features. So you need to know specific examples of shot types, camera angles, editing, sound, music, cinematography, aesthetics, acting style, and all that other stuff as well. So, what are the kind of things that we associate with Alfred Hitchcock's auteur signature? Well, according to Ian Mantgani of the BFI, thrillingly distinct murder scenes, MacGuffin plot devices, wrong man escapes and spy adventures leading to chases with extraordinary climaxes in monuments from the British Museum to Mount Rushmore. We think of voyeurism, of floating and lurching inward camera moves, of blondes in peril, and of the cottage industry Hitchcock became in his cameo roles, publicity shots, and TV product lines like Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Hitchcock really was a great self-publicist. He was one of the very first ever directors that people would recognise. MacGuffin, good word, MacGuffin. What does it mean by MacGuffin? Well, Hitchcock invented this term, and it means the thing that drives the story, the thing that drives the plot. It's the thing the hero and the villain are fighting over or chasing or looking for. And Hitchcock's argument was, it doesn't matter what that thing is. Alright? Think about, I know it's not a Hitchcock thing, but think about Pulp Fiction, and that glowing briefcase that glows gold. What's in that briefcase? Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's just something that people are looking for. So, let's look at Hitchcock's film influences. Obviously, Hitchcock started in making films in Britain, working in the British film industry, working his way from the very bottom as in the props department and set dressing department, and as a production designer and storyboard artist. And he works his way all the way up to being a director, and he eventually directs Britain's first ever sound film, The Lodger, classic, excellent use, brilliant use of sound for its time. And he then goes on to Hollywood. But obviously his influences are largely going to be from the early cinema. So we're going to have D.W. Griffiths, for example. D.W. Griffiths, who Alfred Hitchcock said, the classic cutting techniques dating back to D.W. Griffiths have stood the test of time and still prevail today. He called Griffiths the Columbus of the screen, as if he discovered most of the screen and film grammar that is still used to this day. And that's true. D.W. Griffiths was immensely important in early cinema. Films to look out for: The Avenging Conscience or Thou Shalt Not Kill, as an influence on Hitchcock. One of the other great film directors of the early period, Cecil B. DeMille, known for his massive, big budget spectaculars, which of course Hitchcock later made his name with. Notably Forbidden Fruit in 1921 from Cecil B. DeMille, influenced Rebecca in 1940 as well as the Capricorn and Vertigo. But the real influences, the big ones on Hitchcock, came from the Germans. In the interwar period, after the end of World War I and before World War II, the German film industry was extremely important and influential. The German expressionists in particular. The big film studio was UFA, UFA, and state-owned. And Hitchcock went and worked in Germany at the UFA studios for a while. Was massively influenced by the work of people like Fritz Lang. Hitchcock said, "My models were forever after the German filmmakers of 1924 and 1925. Again, Fritz Lang, especially Destiny and The Last Laugh in particular, big influences on Hitchcock's style. Also surrealism, we can look at the work of Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel, notably the film Un Chien Andalou. It's a classic, it's on YouTube, watch it. It's not for the faint of heart, brilliant. On record, Hitchcock praised Buñuel because he was simple as opposed to films where the flowers were out of focus in the foreground, and Dali because of the architectural sharpness of his work, the long shadows, the infinity of distance, and the converging lines of perspective. So it was obviously influenced by those surrealists, and there are a lot of surreal sequences in his films. Let's look at the dream sequence in Vertigo later on. That's a classic example. Also, French film, and in particular French suspense novels. Hitchcock had wanted to adapt a book by Pierre Boulleau and Thomas Narcejac called La Diabolique. Pierre Boulleau, interestingly, also wrote the short story The Planet of the Apes was based on. But anyway, this is La Diabolique, and there was another film called book called The Wages of Fear by Georges Arnault. Both of which ended up getting made by the French filmmaker Henri-Georges Clouzot. Both are truly brilliant films. The Diabolique is an extremely influential and creepy horror movie, and Wages of Fear is one of the most tense and exciting action films ever made. These were made back in the 50s. But Boulleau and Narcejac were both huge fans of Hitchcock, because who wouldn't be? And having heard that he had been interested in making La Diabolique, they set out writing stories specifically in the hope that Hitchcock would buy them. One of those was D'Entre les Morts, which eventually got bought and turned into Vertigo. So what about the Hitchcock style? Well, we've got to boil it down to its basic minimum. As we said, Hitchcock was a proponent of pure cinema. Pure cinema, the stories, the images alone should be able to tell the story. Music, dialogue, everything else was extra. The dialogue alone should have been enough to... Sorry, the pictures alone should be able to tell the story. So, he's wonderful in terms of using imagery to tell stories. There are protracted sequences of Vertigo with no dialogue, and it's purely the shot types, the camera work, and the editing and the music that tell us what's going on. His movies were meticulously designed, beautifully composed, beautifully shot, very formally balanced images, beautiful use of Technicolor, the costumes, the props, everything meticulously designed. Interestingly, Hitchcock never looked through a camera. He knew exactly what every shot would look like, and he meticulously storyboarded everything. His films are edited to perfection. Every single shot is exactly what you need to see at that particular time to advance the story. And again, surrealist imagery, like this shot from the dream sequence in Vertigo, was something, or indeed like the dolly zooms, the Vertigo effect in the towers and stuff. Surrealist imagery featured in quite a few of his films. Reoccurring motifs, stairs, doorways, interesting stairs and doorways. They're liminal spaces. They're not one thing nor not the other. They're not the, like, you know, inside or outside. They're transitional places. Possibly a good metaphor for people's emotional states. Falling from high places, the fear of high places, dangling off cliffs, dangling off, you know, high buildings. Common thing. You know, literally try to create vertigo in the audience. Acrophobia, yeah, the fear of heights. Overbearing mothers, actually, but overbearing, not overhearing. Overbearing mothers. Classically, think of the mother from Psycho, for example. The perfect murder, that's another thing that was an obsession of his. And charming villains. The villains are often really well spoken, really well dressed, really sophisticated and erudite. As are his heroes. But let's get on to the main things, the real meat and bones of Hitchcock. Many of his stories deal with the idea of the wrong man. An innocent man falsely accused, pursued or persecuted. Mistaken identity. Obviously Vertigo has mistaken identity in it, and the entire Madeline Judy thing. Also, to a certain extent, Scotty, is falsely accused of murder, but he doesn't actually murder anyone. But we also get a hero burdened with guilt or charged with proving his innocence. That's definitely true of Scotty in this movie. Voyeurism, scopophilia, the love of looking, the love of watching. Let's face it, Hitchcock was a massive pervert, and it's inherent in all of his films. Watching, spying. Top left we've got Vertigo here. We've got Norman watching Marion get undressed, or Peephole. Rear Window. The entire thing is about voyeurism as our main character. Is that Scotty in that one? Oh, I can't really call it that one. L.B. Jeffries, that's it. He's constantly watching his neighbours through long telescopic scopes, lenses on his camera, or binoculars and things like that. Again, another example of voyeurism from Marnie, as we're watching our main characters. And again, this idea of transforming, of looking, of the fetish of looking from Vertigo. Fetish is a big thing in his films as well. The Hitchcock Blonde, another classic. Hitchcock was known for these icy cool blondes. The ultimate Hitchcock blonde, of course, being Grace Kelly, who we see here in Rear Window. But, he couldn't continue to use Grace Kelly because she disappeared off to Monaco to become a princess. So he spent the rest of his career looking for sort of like Grace Kelly surrogates. And just like the way in which Scotty transforms Judy into Madeline in Vertigo, he did that with his actresses as well. Here we've got Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much. Now, she was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and yet that outfit she's got on is almost almost identical to the one we usually see, Madeline wearing in, or Judy wearing in Vertigo. When he couldn't get hold of big stars like that, he made his own. So again, he took Kim Novak and he's trying to turn her into this blonde character. Later on, when he couldn't get Kim Novak, he took Tippi Hedren here in The Birds. Definite trope of Hitchcock's. He's well known for it. Big landmarks. Mount Rushmore in North by Northwest. The Golden Gate Bridge in Vertigo. He liked to take landmarks that the audience knows and then put them in a completely different context. Take something beautiful and make it scary and creepy. By the way, look at the composition of that shot. Oh god, that's stunning, isn't it? Let's face it. He was also very well known for making cameos in his films. He didn't do it in all of them, but he did in quite a few of them. North by Northwest here, Vertigo here. So, that was something he did that helped to make him famous as a director. Then, look at the look of his films. His use of Technicolor in his movies was breathtaking. Look at this. The sheer spectacle of the colour. And the colour was used as a metaphor. It had meaning. It wasn't just random colour. It was there for a reason. It represented stuff to the audience. We'll talk about Technicolor in Vertigo in more detail in class. But those are some of the key tropes of his movies, the key parts of his auteur signature. Now, of course, the fact that he regularly worked with, different people, or a certain group of people who regularly work with him, you could argue, well, how much of it is entirely down to him? So one of the films things his films are notable for is their gorgeous costume design. Well, Edith Head did the costumes in nearly all of his films, and she was, She's won more Oscars than any other person in Hollywood history. Is she an auteur? We think of the wonderful score in this movie, and in many of his movies. Think of the movies from Psycho. Who wrote that? Bernard Herrmann, one of the great Hollywood, writers of Hollywood scores. Is he an auteur? So remember that film is a collaborative effort, so we've got to ask ourselves, to what extent is Hitchcock's distinctive style his and his alone? How much of it comes down to his work with his collaborators? This is the basics. You can go into this in more detail. Do your own research. Watch the videos. I'm going to link to you in the description and your handouts. If there's anybody questions, you know where I am. And next time we'll be looking at Francis Ford Coppola and Apocalypse Now.